Hello, welcome to Gardeners World. Now, it's not often that we go out at this time of night, and it's not often that you see us as the darkness falls around us, but it's a special programme, and today we'll be looking back at what we got up to here at Berryfields. This week's programme is all about gardening late into the evening.
And let's face it, at this time of year, there's nothing better than being in the garden, squeezing out every last moment of daylight until dusk.
So I took advantage of the longer days by tackling the cottage garden and sprucing it up for the summer.
The longer evenings means that I've had more time in my modern family garden, and that meant earlier I was able to add a range of plants with texture, scent and structure.
And I started late this afternoon in the dry garden with a new project to give the area a sense of identity. We often talk about the dry garden here at Berryfields as though it is the finished article. It's a definite place that we come to, but the truth is it hasn't worked out like that. Our intentions have been good, if not really important, in a year like this with drought and with hot summers and climate change making that a trend that inevitably is going to increase. But as a distinct place, it's not working. It's a collection of plants. And I think the secret of any good garden, even if it's a compartment within a larger garden or the whole thing, is it should feel like an arrival. And the truth is, this dry garden at the moment feels like a corridor, as though it's on its way to somewhere else. And it's time to change that. We want to make this feel like a really important part of Berryfields. Now, nothing could be more dramatic than these. Got some fabulous palms. Perfect to get that feeling of an exotic dry garden that we want. Now, this one here is the Mexican blue. Fabulous plant, will do the job, but it has one drawback, it's heavy. So I need help. Joe, where are you?
Coming in.
Okay.
Put my gloves on.
Yeah, do, because this one, I never wear gloves, but this one is a monster. Because it's got these barbs running up the trunk that will rip you to shreds.
Fabulous though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's beauty. Now, there we go, up there. Hey, I'm in the hole. That's all right. Hang on to it.
Yeah, leaning your way.
Yeah, lean that way and I'll pull. The Mexican blue is from the desert. Warm, hot summers, but cold nights, especially in winter. But it must be well drained. And if it's really well drained and reasonably mature, it should be hardy, certainly below freezing. Okay, you pull, and I'll pull, and hopefully we'll come apart in the middle. Okay.
Oh, look at the roots.
Lovely roots.
Beautiful.
Now, I think the one thing you have to stress when planting a palm, when I'm holding it on my feet,
You're right.
yeah, is not to plant it too deep. Yeah. Really important that. Okay, let's just get some soil around it. So maximum drainage, not too deep. I don't want to lose my marker from around the plants. And we'll talk about protecting it over winter later.
This is the sort of thing you can do when you get home from work, because now's the time to consolidate your summer planting so that instead of it all going to rack and ruin, you're really going to be able to maintain that colour and the form of your plants for ages. Now I'm sticking in these twiggy pea sticks. It's just old hazel all around this clump of delphiniums. These are growing sort of short and very bushy, but if the weather turns really bad, I could lose them. But with these in amongst them to support them, they'll soon disappear under the leaves in a couple of weeks. They should be fine right the way through, and when these top flowers have finished blooming, I can cut them off here and these side shoots will come on. These delphiniums are magnificent. Just look at these. Now, earlier on, we used some of Monty's homemade stakes, these great big wire hoops, right the way around this whole bunch of delphiniums, and it's really done the trick, it's worked. But I want to put some bamboos in these, some single bamboos. I'll give them one per flower head, because if it gets really windy, the volume of flower here is just so dense and so heavy that they could just snap. If I stake them short like this, up to here, then it won't be any good at all. But for the moment, in this quite sheltered cottage garden, they're doing fine anyway. In this garden, a lot of stuff flowers really early. including the Aquilegias, and they've already started to set seed now. The seed heads are green, and if you just take one off and examine it and actually break it apart with your thumbnails, you'll probably find, yeah, the seeds are black, so that means they're ready. And those would work really well if we sowed them straight away, or we can actually store them in a paper bag. So I'm going to cut some of these, and instead of fiddling about examining each one, I'm going to put them all into a bag. Now, it's very difficult, really, to name these properly because they're very promiscuous, so we could get almost anything out of here. But if you actually take the whole stem off with lots of the seed heads on it, then you're going to get hundreds of seed heads, and you'll get literally thousands of seeds in here. Now, a lot of people wait till their Aquilegia seed heads are dry and brown, but by that time you may well have lost a lot of the seed. The other way you can do it is just to stick the bag right over the top of the whole thing and just tie it up whilst it's on the plant. So those won't drop out of their own accord until these pods begin to dry, but the seed is there and it's viable, and that's the important thing.
Here in my family garden, the chamomile lawn has come on a treat. Now, I've had some criticism about this, saying it's not a practical surface, but actually it's knitted together really well, and it's very tough. I can walk on it, you can have a picnic on this lawn, and it's a lot more interesting and drought tolerant than normal grass. It works very well. I'm just bulking out the planting now, adding some more structure, getting some more scented plants into the garden, and also plants that can cope with dry conditions. So I'm using a lovely rosemary that I use quite a lot in gardens, Rosemary Miss Jessop's upright, and as its name suggests, it's an upright form. It's a good structural plant, and it can also be clipped as well. So I'm putting 2 on that side of the pergola and 2 on this side of the pergola, and I can take the top off them and I can square them up, I can play around with shapes, almost topiarise them or turn them into a mini hedge. And of course they're evergreen and have a wonderful aromatic foliage as you brush past them, and a great blue flower too. They've got pretty much everything you want from a plant. So I'm just adding one more on this side. They grow pretty quickly, but I'm going to wait till they get to about this height and then start taking the tops off them and clip them up into a nice shape. Now, the back of the path, I'm putting in something different, something with a much softer leaf. This is Stachys byzantina big ears, also known as lamb's ears. And these plants have got to have the softest foliage of pretty much any plant going. And I'm using them as a ground cover and just to break up the corner of the paving here. They'll creep over the paving a little bit. There's also got a wonderful flower, a purple flower in the summer, attracting loads of bees into the garden as well. And I'm just going to add a little bit more grit here because the silver leaf is an indication they like full sun, which is what they're going to get here. And at the same time, they like well-drained soil. And just backfill it, and it's going to break up the edge of this path really nicely too. Good ground cover plant.
Now, this is where gloves come in because it's awful prickly, but this Chimerops will go in there. Let's move this pot out of the way. Now, we kept this in a pot over 2 winters now at Berryfields, so we know that it's hardy. And Chimerops come from the Atlas Mountains, so it's really cold, hot in summer, blazing hot, but very cold in winter. And as long as it's got good drainage, it'll take, I hope, anything that England can chuck at it. That's backfilled that. So we've got 3 of these, 2 of the Mexican blues, and that creates a sort of semi-formal structure that not only gives us substance, but also sends out a visual message. There's no bones about it. This is a dry garden. Palms, immediately you're thinking of aridity, you've got the colour of the blue of the two types, and it transforms the space. When you've planted them, give them a soak and keep them watered for the first year or so. Every week give them a bit, but this is a perfect example where you can use grey water. They won't mind that at all. And we know that there's no problem with this at Berryfields. This will survive. However, we're not so sure about the Mexican blue, and we'll have to keep an eye on it and probably take protective measures. But I want to leave these out all winter. This has got to last, and eventually I want them to grow really big. Now they're in place. They're setting the scene. They're setting the tone. I think the thing to do now is to release them from bondage and let them fan as they want to. Okay, there we go. And that one can come off a little bit. And then this one. And this sound that they make, I've lain in bed in Mexico and heard the noise of the wind battling through this, and it's a sort of extraordinary sound. It's very evocative. Now this is expensive planting and not something that you would do every day, but it's a major change and a big investment that should last for years.
Well, by early July, this Geranium oxonianum, the common pink one, really needs some brutal treatment. You need to cut it right back to the ground. Although there are flowers and buds on it and it seems a bit cruel, you'll really thank yourself later on, because by the time summer turns into autumn, it will have renewed all that basal foliage and you'll have another lot of flowers. And what's more, the whole clumps will be much, much neater too. Now this is a favourite geranium too. This is Johnson's Blue, and as you can see, it's just about finished flowering. But it only has one flowering season, so no matter how hard I cut it back, it's not going to flower again. But it is going to give me these lovely, soft, velvety leaves. So I'm going to be a bit more circumspect with this one, and I'm just going to take out the flowering stems. Well, the flowered stems, really. Now, when you're in the middle of a bunch of geranium like this, it's very difficult to tell which are the true leaves and which are the flowering stems. But you can actually tell because each one has a node. If it's a flowering stem, it's got a node like this. If it's a leaf, it's just got a simple stalk. So when you bum up in the air and head down, you can really tell the difference. When I've finished cutting these geraniums back, I'm going to water them really well, and then I'm going to give them a mulch with our own compost, so it'll give them lots and lots of nutrient, and we'll get a really good show at the end of the summer. Deadheading can be a bit of a difficult business sometimes. If you're deadheading roses or dahlias, plants that produce more than one flower down the stem, then don't just nip the flower off right at the top like that when it's finished. Get a sharp pair of secateurs and take it right to the place where it joins the main stem. That way you allow the other buds to produce wonderful flowers. If you don't do it, it can die back and sometimes affect the flowering of the other ones. If you're growing something like poppies and they've got one single bloom, then cut them right back to the base. If you cut things back and deadhead, you can be sure that you'll get the maximum benefit from your flowers all summer long.
One of the things I love doing on a summer's evening is walking around the garden as the light is falling, taking pictures, because that's when you get the best quality light, either first thing in the morning or in the evening. And I can't recommend it more highly. Even if you're a rotten photographer like I am, you build up this record of your garden. And also, I love looking back through them in winter. The roses have been really good this year so far, but none better than here in the ornamental fruit garden. And this little corner which has got two white roses, Blanc Double Coubert and the standard iceberg, which is just incredible. And they're both set against that black elder with its white flowers. And that just looks fab.
I love gardening in the evening It's such a great stress-busting activity, and also it's a lot cooler as well. And I don't like, gardening in the full sun. It's just too hot. This is the time to do it. Now, at the back of the garden, I'm putting in this Arbutus unado, the strawberry tree. It's going to make quite a large evergreen tree, but it's going to be a great backdrop to the garden as a whole. And it's got a wonderful bark on it, a cinnamon-coloured bark. So what I'm going to do is just take some of these lower branches off to expose the stem, and also it's going to create some formative pruning, just create a really nice shape to the tree as a whole. Now, it's got some fruit on it already, you can see, green at the moment, but they will turn into a red strawberry colour, and they are edible, but they're pretty foul really, so I wouldn't try eating them. And also later on it's going to get flowers, so you get the fruit and the flowers at the same time, which is an interesting combination. The flowers are like little lily of the valley type bells, really very delicate, gorgeous. And it's actually a member of the heather family, the Erica family, but it will tolerate a lime soil as well. So it's a really good tree for a small garden. It's going to create a lovely backdrop to the garden as a whole, and it's going to get quite big eventually and expose more of that lovely stem. Now, another evergreen shrub I'm putting in is this little Cistus sunset. Now, cistus are very much a Mediterranean type plant. There's a Mediterranean style planting coming through in this garden, mainly because there's a lot of drought tolerant plants here. And it's also known as the rock rose, loads of grit in the soil here. But what I like about this one is that it stays nice and compact, because cistus can tend to get a little bit leggy, especially if the soil's too rich, and they can get too big for a garden this size. But this will stop at about 60 centimetres, about 2 feet. And you see it's got a wonderful flower on it already. Great colour. Just going to tease the roots out a little bit. Just pop it in there. I think it'll be very happy here at the front of the garden.
I'm digging up our garlic because it's got rust. Now, rust is really prevalent, and you get it on all alliums, but particularly garlic, leeks and chives. And you can notice it by these brown spots and spores on the leaves, which look just like rust. Now, it's a fungus, and it can affect the bulb. You get white spores on them, and they can rot, and they certainly don't keep nearly so well. So as soon as you see it, dig them up, and then you can eat them. They'll be perfectly good to eat. They just won't store very well. And if you haven't got rust and you dig up your garlic, do dry them. Dry them really well, and the better dried they are, the better they will store. But we'll eat those over the next month or so. But what I want to get on with now is go back to our potato trial. Now, if you remember, Sarah and I, the very first programme of this series, planted 3 different types of potato. There was Duke of York, Charlotte and Sante. First early, second early and main crop. And we split this bed into half, and on this side they were chitted, and on that side unchitted. It was really to see whether there is a difference if you chit or unchit your potatoes. And if you've not grown potatoes before, chitting them means letting them sprout before you put them in the ground, and the idea is that they grow much faster. You can see that we've got what looks like disaster here. In fact, there's nothing wrong with the potatoes, it's simply drought. This bed has not been watered at all. And the Charlotte, for some reason, have suffered much worse than the others and flopped. However, it's not those I want to dig. It's the first earlies, the Duke of York. These first earlies went into the ground at the very end of March, and you would expect them to be ready for harvest after 90 days. The ground is like rock, and however carefully you dig them up, you always end up spearing or breaking some potatoes. But we've treated both exactly the same, and now we can take our measurements. Now, you don't have to measure these to see that the chitted ones are bigger and more numerous than the unchitted. Now, I think some of that is because there was more moisture in the soil earlier on in the season, and because the chitted had foliage and were ahead, they were able to take more advantage of the available water. However, they've both had identical treatment in identical conditions, and you have to take it as you find them. Now, I will weigh them just to check it out. And the chitted come in at just under 6, actually. Let's call it 5.5, or about 12 pounds. And unchitted about half, just under 3, just over 6 pounds. So practically double. Now, I think the evidence of that is, if you have any doubt, it's better to chit first early potatoes, particularly if you live in an area where there might be drought or lack of moisture, or you're on an allotment where it's difficult to water them. If you can't irrigate, chit your first earlies. The evidence is there right in front of you. As the day closes and the evening draws in, all sorts of creatures start to appear in the garden that you never see during the day. And we went along to the RHS Harlow Carr Gardens, where the curator, Matthew Wilson, showed us how certain planting can specifically draw in the creatures of the night.
During the day, our gardens are home to tens of thousands of invertebrates. They help to keep our gardens healthy. They pollinate plants. They eat one another, and they get eaten by other things. But one thing's for sure, they're all around us. A garden shouldn't be planned just to provide food and habitats during the daytime. Consider those that improve nocturnal biodiversity too. Primulas are sexy plants in just about every way. During the daytime they kick out a lot of fragrance, but at night they really ramp up the scent to attract those late evening pollinators. And there are some plants that don't just go out of their way to attract nighttime pollinators, they rely on them. And a classic case in point is this sun-loving, drought-tolerant evening primrose. The perfect plant if you don't mind things seeding around a little bit. Nighttime pollinators will be attracted by even the smallest of plantings like this container, and you can't blame them with zingy agostaki, this acid yellow nicotiana, and the must for every chocoholic moth, Cosmos atrosanguinea. To help us identify the myriad of nighttime species, we've invited along Dr. Dave Chesmore, one of Yorkshire's leading moth experts.
This is called a mercury vapour lamp, which contains a lot of ultraviolet light that attracts the moths. The best time to set up a moth light is on a warm summer's evening, which is cloudy and has little wind, in a dark place where there are very few other light sources. The egg boxes are to stop the moths from bashing themselves around. Even though they're attracted to light, they will hide away from light. People don't generally realise just how many moths there are. I mean, you know, you think in Britain there may not be that many moths. There's nearly 2,600 different species, of which only 50 of which are actual butterflies. So we've got phenomenal numbers of moths, and they're all different colours. Most people tend to think that the hawk moths are most spectacular, simply because they're big and they're very brightly coloured. But the micro moths, some of them are absolutely fantastic. Some of the colours are gold and silver. Another one coming in. Things like the peach blossom is a beautiful moth, but it's actually a very common moth, even though it's, you know, people will not be familiar with it. I'm going to take that one home with me to photograph. This one's called a flame, and it looks just like a twig, so it's very good camouflage. When it's at rest on a stem, you just couldn't see it in the daytime. A lot of moths will head for Buddleia, Nicotiana, night-scented stock. Buddleias are particularly good. On a good night, I would expect a few hundred moths to appear, maybe 50 species.
You can experience that sort of thing yourself, because the RHS are running wild nights out at their major gardens across this summer, and you can get details of that at our website. And as the evening of a long summer's day descends into night, you can get some of the best moments in a garden, especially if you light it. And here at Berryfields, we've been looking at different ways of using what I think are the very best kind of lights, which is simply candles.
One of the most relaxing things to do in the evening is to water the garden. It's great to give your plants a really good drink, and they get the full benefit because there's less evaporation. What's more, it's not nearly so hot when you're lugging those watering cans around.
If you've got box hedges or topiary, now is the time to cut. Research shows that if they're cut early on in the summer, the plant grows strongly and is better able to resist pests, disease, and the risk of frost in autumn. It's also better to do this in the evening and thus avoid the chance of the plants being scorched by hot sun.
As dusk turns to night, the slugs and the snails come out in the garden, so it's the perfect time to arm yourself with a jam jar and a torch and get out there and just pick them off by hand.
Right, here we are. I've got the important bit of kit. Go with the strawberries. What do you want, Carol, red or white?
A white with strawberries, don't you think?
Well, actually, I like a drop of red, but I completely see that it can be delicious. It's the end of the programme, the end of the day, and the sort of end of the first part of the summer for us, because we're taking a break from Berryfields now until the 1st of September, when we will be returning. In the meantime, we have got 5 one-hour specials that we'll be showing across the summer. Sarah is doing 2, one on fruit and one on healing plants. Rachel's doing one on roses, and you're doing one on...
I'm doing one on parks, filming it at the moment.
Right,
Yeah.
OK.
And we're all going to meet each other for the road show that's coming from Sheffield this year. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, so plenty to see. Of course, lots of gardening to keep going with. And do make the most of these long evenings. They're diminishing, but there are still a lot left. So have a really good summer, and we'll see you back here on the 1st of September. Bye-bye.
Happy gardening. Cheers.
Cheers.